I'm Mitch. You may have noticed that the profile picture of this channel is the Gearshift knob that's in my car. It's a custom handle that I made from a block of black walnut from the next door neighbor's yard. It's styled after the old school muscle car shifter, the Hurst shifter. So here's my my black walnut creation. There's the nut underneath, and then here's the original knob for comparison. Recently, the Gearshift handle on my dad's car started coming apart, and he thought he'd make a new one out of wood too. I'll let him take over now and show you the steps involved in making his own shifter handle.
I thought the plastic had split in two, but it turns out that the two pieces are screwed together, and the screw had somehow managed to completely loosen itself. So I was able to fix the handle, but in taking off this top plate, I chipped it, and I also scuffed up the top of the handle a bit. It still functions just fine, but I thought I'd go ahead anyway and see what I could make myself. The thread is M10 by 1.25 millimeter. The exposed part of the shift rod is about 48 millimeters high, and the threaded part of it is about 28 millimeters. I'm going to make the handle with scraps of wood left over from other woodworking projects. I'm using alternating dark and light layers of wood. The dark wood is the same black walnut that Mitch used, and the light wood is silver maple from a tree in my yard that was knocked down years ago in an ice storm. I've already glued up some of the pieces for the shift handle, but I'm going to add a couple more just to try to match the size of the original knob. I'm just using regular wood glue, and then I'm going to clamp the pieces together. The top pieces extend a little farther to give my fingers something to grab. I don't have a lathe, so I'll mainly just be sanding it to its final shape. You can see how the growth rings were oriented when it was in the tree. The cells that make up the growth rings are oriented vertically to carry water and nutrients up the trunk, while these lighter colored cells, called medullary cells, carry water and nutrients across the trunk. In black walnut, they're fairly visible in quarter riven wood and seem to sparkle in the sun, so I thought that would give it a cool look. Now the glue has dried, the next thing is to drill a hole for the nut. It's a lot easier to drill it now while the sides are flat and square. The M10 by 1.25 nut is 3/4 of an inch across at its corners. A 3/4 inch hole wouldn't hold the nut. The next smaller size drill bit I have is 5/8 of an inch, so I'm going to use that and chisel out a hexagon shaped cavity. I would also have preferred to use a locking nut, but I couldn't find one in that size. So I'll use Teflon tape or thread locker to keep it in place. As you can see, this bolt doesn't bottom out against the hole. It's a 2-inch long bolt, which is about 51 millimeters. If you recall, the height of the Gearshift shaft was 48 millimeters, so the hole is deep enough. I've drawn an outline of the nut around the hole, and then I'll chisel it out. probably want to check your progress as you go along. I've threaded the nut onto this bolt of the same size. It makes it a little easier to handle, and it's kind of snug. You want it to be fairly snug. Not so snug when you pound it in it splits the wood, but you want it to hold in place. If it's a little loose, I think I'm just going to put like some super glue on it to hold the nut. The nut doesn't have to be very deep in its socket, as long as the hole is deep enough for the shifter shaft. I think that should be good. As it turned out, I had to extract the nut and chisel the hole a bit deeper. Unlike with Mitch's Subaru, as you can see here, with the Mazda, the threads don't go all the way down the shaft past the boot. So when the nut got down to the bottom of the threads, it left a gap between the handle and the boot, and the top of the handle was also higher than I wanted it to be. I extracted the nut by threading a flange nut onto a bolt of the same size, then threading the bolt into the handle nut. Turning the flange nut clockwise pulled the nut out of the handle. After chiseling the socket deeper, I epoxied the nut into the handle. One benefit from the first attempt was that some of the glue got onto the threads of the nut, making it kind of a lock nut. I used this epoxy by putting a layer around the outside of the cavity and pushing the nut down into it. Now the bottom of the nut is about 18 millimeters deep. Next I'm going to use a sander to shape the handle. I'm pretty much doing it freehand, so I hope it will come out okay. After about 10 minutes of sanding, this is what I've got to so far, but still got a little ways to go, so continue on. Well, I think that's looking pretty good. I'll do a little bit more fine sanding, but then all I've got left is to check the fit in the car and finish it, and then I'm done. After some sanding with 220 grit sandpaper, I'm taking a tack cloth to clean any residue off it, and then I'm going to just cover it with sanding sealer. I could probably stain the walnut to get more contrast, but I don't think there's any way I could get the stain just on the walnut and keep it off the maple, so I'm just going to use a sanding sealer and then some polyurethane finish. Okay, we'll let that dry and then sand it and put the poly on. The sanding sealer is dry now, so after a light sanding with 220 grit sandpaper, I'll apply a few coats of polyurethane. I like this wipe-on poly because it's oil-based and I think it leaves a harder finish than water-based, and there's almost no cleanup needed, like with brush-on. I didn't put the gear numbers on it, since after driving this car for over 7 years, I have a pretty good idea where the gears are located. If I change my mind though, I'll probably use this wood burner and stencils to put the numbers on. Let's take off the old handle and try the new one. I thought I'd have to use something like Teflon tape to keep it from spinning, but it's screwing on pretty snugly, so I think it'll stay put. I sanded it a bit more to round the corners, and there it is. The black walnut should darken quite a bit over time. It didn't take too long to make, and the materials came to only a few dollars, so if I decide I don't like it that much, it won't be hard to make one in a different shape or with a different wood. Like the spalted maple, maybe. It's now about 15 months later, and the thread locker I used to keep the knob from spinning has let go, so I'm going to use a set screw to hold it in place. The walnut wood is darkened nicely, although it probably could use another coat of polyurethane. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch by 20 Allen head set screw and T-nut held in place with wood screws. Now the T-nut is in place and I've got the set screw started. I'll screw it on the Gearshift lever and see how it works. Okay, the set screw's snug now. I think that's a good angle. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think that looks pretty straight, so I'll add a little glue to help keep the nut in place. It's not, it's not coming out.